Certainly, we've had a lot of focus on trade tensions with China today, something we talked about earlier. But a European deal might be in new jeopardy. There's a warning that U.S. tariffs on EU cars would, quote, destroy a truce. The chief of staff for the European Trade Commission is saying, and this is a quote, if we should be slapped with car tariffs or tariffs on car parts as well, that would clearly destroy the prospect of a positive agenda. David O'Sullivan is with us, European Union ambassador to the U.S. Good to see you, sir. And why don't we start there on this idea that maybe we shouldn't be moving past the United States and Europe when it comes to trade? Is a deal really in jeopardy?
I think President Juncker and President Trump met in the White House on the 25th of July and agreed a very constructive agenda on how we could take forward our trade relations, and we're working our way through that. And both sides agree that there would be no introduction of new additional tariffs while those talks are ongoing. So I think we're having good progress in those talks, and I'm very confident that both sides will stick to their side of that bargain.
What if they don't? What if there are additional auto tariffs, say?
Well, it's very clear that if that were to be the case, of course, the negotiations would not be able to go forward. But I want to emphasize, we think those negotiations are going well. Cecilia Malmström was here with Ambassador Lighthizer last week, had very constructive talks on the regulatory dimension of that. We're talking about what we can do on LNG, about soybean exports. So we feel the talks are going well, and therefore we're sure that both sides will stick to the commitment of no additional tariffs while these talks are proceeding.
Now, so you're positive. I get that, but as you said at the beginning of your answer, if that were to happen, if there were additional auto tariffs, the talks would not go forward. Does that mean they would just be cut off, or Europe would respond in kind? Or?
Well, I don't really want to. I mean, we have made it clear that if we are the subject of additional unfair tariffs, we, of course, will reserve our right, as we have done with the steel and aluminium tariffs, to impose rebalancing tariffs of an equivalent amount. But I really want to emphasize that both sides have agreed not to do that while the talks are going forward, and we're very confident that these talks are making progress. Indeed, we hope that President Trump and President Juncker will see each other again in Buenos Aires in the margins of the G20 meeting and give additional impetus to what is already a very positive process.
Okay, that's interesting because we've been focused so much, and maybe we shouldn't be, we've been focused so much on China, on the U.S. and China and the meeting between Xi Jinping and President Trump in Buenos Aires, but you're telling us the president is meeting President Juncker at the G20 might be, well, maybe not just as important, but very important. What do you actually expect to come out of that?
Well, I think the two men will take stock of the progress which has been achieved based on the agreement they reached at the end of July. We believe that is a positive position, and I hope that they will give additional impetus for us to take forward those negotiations and achieve early deliverables which will help stabilize the trading relationship between us and grow that relationship in the best interests of the United States and of the European Union.
And kind of putting a bow on U.S.-European negotiations so that the rest of the world can together focus on China? Are we still not close to that point? How far away are we, in your view, from being there?
Well, I think if you look at the agenda, which involved potentially a free trade agreement on industrial products, that takes a bit of time. The USTR has notified the Congress. There's a 90-day delay before we can go forward. So certain aspects of this can go forward more quickly than other. For example, there's been a huge increase in soybean imports from the United States into the European Union. So it's a package of measures which will not all proceed at an equal pace, but that does not stop us in the meantime, by the way, from cooperating on our common concerns with China, which we share, and where we are working together also to address some of those concerns.
Okay, even if no deal final deal is in place. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you at least one question about everything that's been happening in the UK. What do you make of Theresa May's situation, and how is that complicating all your other trade discussions there with Brexit seeming so uncertain?
Well, I think on the European Union side, we feel that we have been able to arrive at a very balanced and sensible agreement on how the United Kingdom can have an orderly withdrawal from the European Union at the end of March, as was wished for by the British people in their referendum. We think this is a very balanced deal, taking into account the constraints on the British side, the constraints on the European side. Of course, we understand that it's the subject of passionate political debate in the United Kingdom. That process has to play itself out. But on the European side, we feel that this is a balanced and well-crafted deal which respects the constraints on both sides of the table.
Ambassador, thank you, sir. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Okay.